This is a Martin Litton quote. Even at first sight, if you take a good long look, the Grand Canyon may claim more of your life than you can afford. In 1939, just 1 year after Norman Nevels ran the first commercial trip through Grand Canyon, Martin Litton was a 22-year-old publicity man for the Wigwam Resort in Phoenix. He was peering over the rim. This meeting of two great natural forces, Litton and the canyon, would irrevocably alter the future of both. Grand Canyon National Park was barely 20 years old and included just over 1/3 of the canyon's 278-mile length. It had suffered many depredations already without so much of a word of opposition. Although rim and trail development had been largely halted with the formation of the park, the newly formed Lake Mead had recently drowned out 40 miles of the river. Assaults would continue to grow exponentially as the West developed. Litton was a homegrown environmental warrior. As a teenager in Southern California, he wrote to the Los Angeles Times, "The people of the entire state should rise up against the destruction of Mono Lake. Mono Lake is a gem among California's greatest scenic attractions." This is like 35 years before the Mono Lake battle. Martin's fighting in high school. At UCLA, Litton helped organize California Trails, a group that successfully fought the construction of roads over Kearsarge Pass and Olancha Passes in the High Sierra. I didn't like a lot of roads on the map. I wanted some empty space. I wanted a frontier, not just for adventure, but for that part of the world which would be unmarked wherever it might be. When you'd look at a map of the Mojave Desert and see these roads crisscrossing all over it, to me, that was terrible. And the idea they'd be crossing the Sierra and chopping up the longest of all our wildernesses was an anathema to me. I thought everybody ought to take care of how beautiful the world was, and as far as I knew, everybody did. It never occurred to me to do anything but what you're impelled to do and feel and express. World War II intervened, and Litton tried to join the Army the Army Air Corps. Colorblindness disqualified him, but he managed to fudge a subsequent eye exam and become a pilot for the most hairball of all aircraft, troop gliders. Huge, flimsy airships built on a threadbare budget, towed over the English Channel, often at night, behind enemy lines. It was the pilot's job to land this falling brick without killing anyone and then creep back across enemy lines and do it again. On leave, Litton married his college sweetheart, Esther Clouet. Martin was at war while Esther bought a home, and later they began the work of raising 4 kids. After the war, Litton took a job as a circulation man on the LA Times, roaming remote parts of California to drum up newspaper sales. At nights and on weekends, Litton began to write stories for the Times, illustrated with his photographs. He would leave them on the editor's desks, and editors, seeing well-written stories, began running them. I did a number of heavily illustrated articles that took up major space in the paper. They were very, very one-sided. That is, they told the right side. It was usually something I was outraged about. I mean, rising up in righteous indignation. In 1951, on another self-assignment for the LA Times, Litton returned to Grand Canyon, clambering down the Toroip route to document a Mexican hat expedition's running lava falls. I accompanied them to Whitmore Wash, hiked out, wrote his story, and it was called Reclamation Bureau Plans, Perils, Scenic Wonderland. There it is, 1951, Reclamation Bureau Plan, Perils, Scenic Wonderland. That is 15 years before it became a big public battle. This guy is so ahead of his time. Perhaps the most important story Martin Litton wrote for the LA Times was a major spread on the proposed dam at Echo Park in the heart of Dinosaur National Monument. Litton had visited the area and crafted a story of outrage about the federal plans to dam and flood this national treasure. It was a story that attracted the attention of Sierra Club's new executive director, David Brower. Click! And David Brower saw these things and got in touch with me and wanted me to be in their club. Well, Litton was dubious, viewing the club as a docile group of knitters and day hikers. Brower responded, "That's going to change. I'm in charge now." And it did. Litton joined and quickly was elected to the board of the directors. Thus began an uneasy alliance that rocked the environmental world throughout the 1960s. Uneasy because even though Brower was far more radical than most of the Sierra Club board and desperately needed Martin's support, Litton was sometimes too radical even for Brower. "I sort of ran my own course in the Sierra Club," Litton recalled. "I didn't feel cooperation was essential. I thought dissent and ferment, or whatever you want to call it, might be essential." Yet Brower valued Litton's relentless prodding to do the right thing, and however impolitic it might be. Brower wrote, "Some people get the kudos and others out of inequity don't. Martin Litton is due most of those addressed to me in error. More years than I will ever admit, he has been my conservation conscience." Martin says, "People always tell me not to be extreme. Be reasonable, they say. But I never felt it did any good to be reasonable about anything in conservation, because what you give away will never come back, ever." Click. In the Echo Park battle, the Sierra Club started out merely bemoaning the potential scenic loss. It was Litton who urged them to go after every facet of the multi-dam Colorado River storage project. Click. "We're giving the enemy undue advantage," Litton wrote Brower, "by sticking to our bird watching and refusing to meet him on his own ground. It's easy to show the value of Dinosaur Park, but that won't save it. Let's really knock the props out from under the dammers by nullifying their economic necessity palaver wherever we can." Brower went ahead and did that and attacked them on their own numbers, and they won. But here's where Brower and Litton learned one of the harshest lessons of their career. Sierra Club allowed the Colorado River Storage Project to pass, along as Echo Park and Split Mountain Dam were removed. Click. There's some of the pictures that Martin took. Click. And the book that they put out and gave to everyone in Congress. Click. Martin even wrote for the Weekly Reader, had kids fighting this dam. Click. And it's still there today. But they lost Glen Canyon. For the rest of their careers, both men, especially Martin Litton, swore to never make a compromise again. You start off with a willingness to compromise, you've given up, you've lost. Even though the final result in most cases is a compromise, it's a compromise that was reached between two sides, each of which was adamant and was not going to give in. The only way the Sierra Club ever won anything was by refusing to compromise. Grand Canyon Dams, Redwood National Park, you go right down through the whole list. When we compromised, we lost. Never ask for what's reasonable, only for what's right. Click. Click. In 1961, Sunset Magazine hired Litton as their travel editor. The family moved north to the Bay Area, and by luck and fate, Litton had gone from a job where he was paid to roam all of Southern California as he photographed and wrote on the sidelines, to a job where he was paid to do the same thing as he roamed the entire West, often with the use of Sunset's company plane. Click. So unlike the rest of the Sierra Club board, who for the most part held their city jobs and knew little of the geography of the country, Litton became ever more the expert. Click. Wallace Stegner wrote, "Litton knows the terrain of California and the West by the square inch. I don't know of anyone who knows it better." When the move for Redwood National Park gained momentum, Litton knew Redwood Creek to be one of the few, perhaps the only intact redwood watersheds left uncut, and pressed for that to be the centerpiece, and it is. It was a difficult struggle, though, with Litton going up against the Save the Redwood League. They were in favor of a small amalgamation of state parks. Litton wanted big watershed protection. A few feathers were ruffled, but the park exists today. Click, 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 and click. Dozens of other environmental battles throughout the West bear Litton's tracks, but Grand Canyon was never far from Litton's mind. Click. There we go. As a result of his 1951 river adventures, he became acquainted with P.T. Riley, an early commercial boatman who had begun running his own private canyon trips. Martin and Esther accompanied Riley in 1955, putting them on the first 300 travelers to traverse the Grand Canyon. Litton rowed a boat for Riley in 1956. Click, click, click. Oh, yeah. Look at that handsome devil. And there is, I think, the Flavel 2? Flavel 1. By 1962, rumors of a plan to dam Grand Canyon had begun to resurface in Arizona. Litton wanted to launch a preemptive strike. When he asked Riley for help in launching a publicity trip, Riley demurred, having scuttled all his boats and retired from river running. Click. Click. Love that. Click. There's Riley. That's not the actual scuttling of the boats, but he did end up sinking them all. Martin pressed for getting new boats and adapting Oregon drift boats, which he preferred to call dories. They ordered 2. Click. There's an Oregon Mackenzie boat. Click. And there's the 2 they ordered, 1 decked out already. The trip launched, and Litton was launched into a riverborne venue for the fighting for the environment. They felt they were the best rivercraft yet. Litton and Riley teamed up again in 1964 for another anti-dam trip. Click. Click, click, it's a silly hat, click, producing Francois Leday's Sierra Club book, Time and the River Flowing. Shortly after that, Riley hung up his oars for good and sold his boat to Litton. Litton, however, was gaining momentum, and thus began running one or more trips every year, mostly with friends or for those who could help in his battles for the earth. In the mid-1960s, the Arizona delegation of Senators Barry Goldwater, Carl Hayden, with Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall and his brother Morris, announced they needed 2 dams in Grand Canyon to help finance the Central Arizona Project Canal System. Click, click, click. There's the book they produced. Click. And there's Barry Goldwater, Governor Paul Fannin, Mo Udall, Carl Hayden, and Stu Udall. The Sierra Club board remained silent, with some of the board even favoring the dams. At the time, neither dam was in the national park boundary. Click. There's the stair step that they proposed. Click. Coming all the way down from Wyoming, there's Marble Canyon. Click. And Bridge Canyon dams. Click. And there's the park, and you can see Bridge Canyon Dam site is bordered by Wallapai Reservation and undesignated land, and upstream, Marble Canyon Dam, bordered by Navajo Reservation and Kaibab National Forest. So no national monument to fuss about. Click. Click. There they are. Click. And there's a artist conception. At the annual meeting, Martin Litton erupted in an outpouring of eloquence and invective, and the Sierra Club board reversed its stance and voted unanimously to fight tooth and nail. David Brower was sicked upon the dam builders. Click. There's Martin at the meeting. Click. Save Grand Canyon. There's Dave Brower. The tale of the fight can and does fill books and cannot be adequately told here. In short, a massive public battle ensued. The bill died in committee on its first attempt, but the Arizona delegation vowed to push it through the following year. Meanwhile, Stuart Udall went down the river to see what all the hubbub was about. He came off the river a changed man, and the dams were removed from the bill. But for the domino effect of Litton's opening volley at the Sierra Club, the dams would most likely have been built. The Bureau accused Brower and Litton of fighting below the belt. I believe in playing as dirty as they do or worse, Litton said shamelessly. If the end is a noble one, let the chips fall where they may. We certainly aren't sorry we kept the dams out of Grand Canyon, and if we lied to do it, fine. The case trumps all, and Grand Canyon is a plenty noble case. When Pacific Gas and Electric wanted to build a nuclear reactor, click. There's one of the ads, click. Wanted to build a nuclear reactor at Diablo Canyon. Litton fought like hell to get it defeated, but while he was in Turkey, the Sierra Club passed it. He came back and tried to get the Sierra Club to reverse the decision. The acrimony was incredibly high among the board. The battle was lost. A year later, against eloquent arguments by Litton and others, David Brower was fired. Litton left the board soon after, and an era of magnificent environmental warfare came to an end. Another era ended around the same time. Litton's relationship with Sunset Magazine had always been a bit tense. Sunset was never particularly eager to be activist, said David Brower, and Martin was never eager at all not to be. It finally came to a head when Litton shouted, "I quit," once too many times in front of the wrong people, and that was it. He says, "My feeling has always been that you can't always win, but you can always try. And that we're not as poor for the battles we've lost as for the ones we never fought. Win or lose, there's some measure of victory in the endeavor." By 1970, with his Sunset career setting in the West, Litton realized he'd have to become a commercial outfitter. Click. He incorporated his Grand Canyon dories and began nearly 2 decades of running the quirkiest river operation in history. Whereas most river operators chose to use practical and economical inflatable rafts, Litton chose wooden dories. Click. The dory is an ancient design. We didn't originate it. It goes back into antiquity. This is some terrible footage of Martin crashing and burning. There's a kind of magnificent shape, there's a kind of magic about the shape of the boat in terms of its stability and ability to recover from extreme situations. Self-righting, practically. The boat is something beautiful to look at. It has lines that belong on the water. The dories were really adapted by us because they handle so well. They're enjoyable to row, and you get response for them. They respond to the oars. There's a mystic thing about a dory to those of us who know them. And I feel that anyone who looks at a dory and has to ask why you use that will never understand, no matter what kind of answer you give. Click. There he is touching up the Diablo Canyon. He changed the names of some of the early boats, and from then on put them all up as monuments for things lost. Got the vibe. The dory was not just beautiful, it was the ideal craft from which to convey the message. The message. There are reasons why the river should be natural. One is the joy of running on a natural river, knowing you're as close to nature as you can be. And the other is, whether we run it or not, nature has a right. It has a right to be here, untrammeled and unfettered. Man doesn't have to screw everything up, and yet we go out of our way to do so. Greed is the motive, and it's important to frustrate greed. We're all greedy for one thing or another, but some of our desires are on a higher plane. We have no right to change this place. Do we have a right to interrupt nature, even for a short time, to exterminate species, to kill the last fly? That's not our right. We're the aberration on Earth. Humans are what's wrong with the world, and it shouldn't show down here. The best way for people to understand how important it is to have the bottom of the Grand Canyon preserved and to have its aquatic life saved and its riparian zone with the beauty that's there kept is perhaps to have them on that river and let them feel the way it stirs and rumbles and moves along at your own pace and the kind of life that the river has. It has a tremendous force and appeal that I can't describe. And the memory of the majesty of Grand Canyon, what it does to their lives, to be away from their routines for a while, even for a short while, the experience has somehow opened their eyes to something bigger and greater in life. They understand the whole universe better because of having been in the Grand Canyon and isolated from other things and having time to think. A river trip has been called a voyage of life. Click, 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 click. Love the tongue there. Martin and Georgie, click, click. Martin showing us how to do fiberglass work. Click, 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 click. Let's see if the magic worked. Here he comes, flying through camp. Click. In 1987, Litton sold Grand Canyon dories, but came back for occasional trips. He set the record for the oldest to row the canyon in 82. He shared the oars at 85, and then again at 90. Click. There is a later trip with P.T. Riley, click, with Brower, click. Running Lava Falls at 85, click, click, click. There's Martin at 90 on the river, click. His bravado, eloquence, and aplomb and passion seemed only to increase with his years. A showman, a ham, an orator. He played Othello in college, and it showed. He was never at a loss for the perfect turn of phrase, but what some might have mistaken for egomaniacal center staging could not have been further from it. He was truly selfless, and everything he did was for the great cause, to help save another threatened spot or species, to help stop the destruction of the earth. He knew his own well-crafted persona was one of his strongest tools. For the last 3 decades, Litton's passion was the great sequoia forests of California. He fought for and won the establishment of Sequoia National Monument, but that was insufficient. For years, after all the logging was to have been stopped within the new monument's borders, it continued in high gear. Litton fought until his death at 97 years old. Click, 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 click. He's storming Washington in his late 90s. Click. Meeting the new guy. Click. 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 When he passed in 2014, he left a living legacy throughout the West, but nowhere greater than the Grand Canyon. Click. Click. We created something more beautiful by not defiling it. Saving it is an act of creation. We kept it undesecrated. We had made the case that the Grand Canyon was worth saving. The Grand Canyon is holy, you know. In the public's eye, the Grand Canyon should not be fooled around with. Click.